My wife plotted to steal half my business, so I exposed her affair in front of her entire family, and then It started like every other normal evening. Only this time I had spent hours making everything perfect, thinking I was doing something meaningful for someone who clearly saw me as nothing more than a placeholder. You know the kind of day where you're so buried in the small tasks, scrubbing down patio furniture, seasoning brisket for hours, lining up wine glasses in perfect symmetry. You almost forget you're not doing it for yourself. I'd woken up around 5:40 that morning, lit the smoker in the backyard before the sun was even fully up, and spent the next 10 hours cleaning, prepping, and mentally preparing to host Sabrina's family, who have never exactly seen me as worthy of their daughter's time, let alone her life partner. I didn't think much of her coldness that day. She was snappier than usual, complaining about the tablecloth's color and the flower arrangement I'd thrown together from the yard like it was a personal offense. At first, I chalked it up to pre-family dinner tension, the kind of anxiety she always had when Charles, her father, was in town. Man has a stare like he's carving up a sales team. But there was something under her skin this time that felt off. Not just tension, but distance. She was checking her phone like it owed her money, changing tabs on her laptop the second I walked by, leaving rooms mid-conversation to take calls from the firm. Even her smile had started to glitch, like it was something she had to rehearse between tasks. I didn't think betrayal when I saw those things. I thought maybe she was burned out. I thought maybe I had left my boots in the hallway too many times. Maybe she was irritated I hadn't fixed the leaking faucet yet. After nearly a decade together, you start reading moods like weather patterns. But this storm was different. I'd been blind before, sure, but never deaf. When you've been with someone long enough, their silence says more than their words ever could. That afternoon, just before dinner, Sabrina asked me to grab 2 extra chairs from the garage. I nodded, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and headed through the side door, thinking it was a quick task. As I turned the corner by the back fence, I heard her voice, quiet, sharp, too familiar, and then Troy's laugh following it like a slap across the face. They were standing among the pines near the edge of our yard, both with glasses of wine, her leaning into him like they were sharing an inside joke, which they were. "I still can't believe you married this loser," Troy said, as casually as someone pointing out weeds in the garden. "Dad's right. You've got to divorce him before you're stuck with a kid and can't get out." She exhaled through her nose, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from joy. "Already working on it," she replied. "My lawyer says we can take half his business too. It's practically idiot-proof." The words hit harder than any physical blow I've ever taken. 7 years together, and she'd already built the exit ramp. They laughed. She took another sip of her wine. Troy made some comment about me playing construction worker while she wasted the best years of her life waiting for me to grow up. Then they said another name, Logan, and my entire body froze. Logan, apparently, was the one who actually had a plan, as Troy put it. Not to mention a real job, real money, and no weird obsession with hammering things like a caveman. They were still talking when I backed away quietly, palms sweating like I'd just walked into an ambush, knees locked like if I moved too fast, the whole illusion would come crashing down in a heap of table settings and wine glasses. I walked into the garage, grabbed the chairs, came back smiling like nothing was wrong. I saw my reflection in the hallway mirror. Normal face, even breathing, practiced calm. Meanwhile, inside, it felt like someone had detonated a mine right beneath the foundation of everything I thought I understood about my life. As I carried those chairs into the dining room, Charles asked me how business was going, his voice dripping with false interest, expecting me to say I was struggling, hoping to confirm his beliefs. I gave him a tight smile and said, "Busy as ever. Clients keep multiplying." Denise criticized the way we'd arranged the living room, suggesting it was a little cramped for entertaining. I nodded politely and offered to move the armchair. The entire time, I watched Sabrina across the room, her smooth expressions, her casual laughter, her ease. How long had she practiced this act? During dinner, she smiled like she hadn't just sentenced our marriage to death. She reached for the breadbasket, complimented the wine, kissed my cheek as if the last hour hadn't happened. I poured her a glass of the red she liked, Cabernet from Sonoma we'd picked out together 2 summers ago during our one real vacation. I smiled at her like a man who wasn't drowning and cut the brisket into slices while Charles told some long-winded story about a trip to Naples I had no interest in. Denise kept making little comments about home staging and resale value. Meanwhile, every bite I took tasted like ash. After dessert, Troy stood up to make a toast, clinking his glass like a smug game show host. "To family," he said, "and to new beginnings." His eyes landed on Sabrina for just a moment too long. She smiled. My jaw clenched. I imagined throwing my wine into his face, smashing the glass against his smug mouth, but instead I raised mine with the same easygoing grin I'd worn all night and said, "To new beginnings." By 11 p.m., they were gone. The house was quiet. Sabrina hummed to herself while cleaning dishes, rinsing dessert plates like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just helped plan my financial execution an hour earlier. I told her to go to bed, said I'd finish the cleanup. She kissed my cheek again. "You're such a good husband," she said. I almost vomited. I waited until she was asleep. Checked her laptop. Password protected. But she was predictable. She used the same pattern, always. On the third try, I got in. Emails to her attorney. Financial files. Transfer records. Spreadsheets tracking the valuation of my company. Notes detailing a divorce timeline. Asset division strategies. Legal language designed to trap me. She'd been transferring small sums, barely below report thresholds, into a private account I didn't know existed. Our savings were lighter by nearly $20,000, gone quietly over months. That wasn't even the worst part. Text messages with Logan were 6 months deep. Late-night flirty exchanges. References to our place and our plans. One said, "He has no idea. This is going to be so easy." I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. And on Monday, for the first time in over 3 years, I called out sick from work. Not because I was sick, but because I was done playing the fool. The man she married may have believed in patience, kindness, and loyalty. But the man she created, the one she underestimated, is about to show her what it looks like when a builder decides to destroy everything, just to make sure nothing rotten remains. I didn't storm out. I didn't confront her. I didn't even break down and let it out loud. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because this wasn't a pain I could scream away. I needed silence, strategy, and a little time to let the weight of what I'd learned press down hard enough to forge something stronger inside me. The old version of me, the man who believed love could outlast contempt, who saw sacrifice as the backbone of marriage, he died quietly that night. I buried him somewhere between Sabrina's inbox and her late-night text thread with Logan, and what rose in his place wasn't someone seeking justice. It was someone preparing for a calculated demolition. On Monday morning, after letting my voicemail catch all the client calls, I drove 30 miles out of Asheville to meet with Miles, the lawyer my friend Grant swore by. We sat in a worn-down booth at a pancake joint that hadn't updated its menu since the early 90s. And while the smell of old syrup soaked into the cushions, I laid it all out. Every screenshot, every audio file, every bank transfer, every spreadsheet she thought I'd never find. Miles, calm as hell with a legal pad and black coffee, listened to it all without blinking. And when I finally stopped talking, he gave me the kind of look you usually reserve for people who just told you they found a bomb in their basement. "She's smart," he said, flipping through one of the pages I printed. "She's building a legal case. She's doing it slowly, in layers, and the worst part is she's not even rushing it. This timeline's meticulous." He tapped a note about the home equity request I had pulled from the bank system just the day before. "You need to protect yourself immediately. She's not coming for closure. She's coming for the ground you built your life on." The phrase rattled in my skull for hours. The ground you built your life on. Miles wasn't exaggerating. She was about to carve out my spine and call it an even split. That afternoon, I drove straight to Russell, my longtime accountant, a man who once helped me file taxes on a year when I was $60 in the red and working 12-hour days to afford 2 gallons of gas and a grocery store hot dog. Russell had the kind of nervous energy that made him check and recheck numbers like a man decoding launch codes. When I told him what Sabrina had been up to, how she'd approached him weeks ago pretending to help prepare for a potential investor. He went pale. I thought something was off, he said, digging into his laptop. She was asking weirdly specific questions about company valuation models, liquid assets, even what triggers IRS audits. We spent the next 3 hours combing through everything. Russell flagged minor inconsistencies she'd planted. Date mismatches on invoice chains, strange account shuffles that gave the appearance of erratic bookkeeping. She's building a case to make it seem like you've been financially irresponsible. She's too smart to fake numbers outright, but not above skewing the story just enough to raise suspicion. By the time we wrapped, we had 24 neatly organized files that told the truth behind every transaction, payment, and equipment expense. Russell printed off summaries while muttering under his breath, something about how he never liked her after she made a joke about his car being charmingly middle class at our engagement party. When I got home that night, Sabrina was in the kitchen boiling pasta, humming like nothing was wrong. She asked how my day was, and I said slow. She said she'd been buried in client work, barely had time to breathe. I poured her a glass of wine and sat down at the island across from her, smiling just enough to keep the mask on. That's when her phone lit up. A name flashed across the screen, Logan. She picked it up immediately, turning her back as she walked into the hallway with a practiced laugh. I just kept sipping my drink and memorizing the sound of her lying. That night, I planted the first camera. Legally speaking, it was my house too. North Carolina law makes it clear that as long as one party consents to audio or video, you're in the clear. Morally? Maybe not so clean. But this wasn't about playing fair anymore. This was survival. I placed it high in the bookshelf, angled to catch her desk and most of the living room. I left a voice recorder tucked into a hollowed-out textbook she never touched. Later, I slipped one into the bedroom, angled discreetly near the dresser, just in case I missed anything vital. I didn't want dirt. I wanted insurance. I wanted to be prepared when she decided to twist the narrative in court and claim I was unstable, aggressive, dangerous. I've worked with enough clients going through divorce to know how quickly lies become law when the paper trail favors the wrong side. The next day, I confirmed something I'd suspected ever since that conversation in the backyard. I called the bank to check the status of the home equity line Sabrina tried to open. The clerk at the branch said the application was still pending and I was, indeed, a required cosigner. I asked for details. She'd requested $185,000 against the house's value, citing emergency liquidity for joint restructuring. My name was on the paperwork, but my signature wasn't. I drove straight to the branch, met with the financial advisor in person, and showed her my ID, my marriage license, and the email history proving I hadn't approved anything. She canceled the application within 15 minutes. I transferred $11,400, exactly half of our joint account's current balance, into a separate account I'd opened under a business trust. Not out of spite, just insurance. She thought she was going to use our shared money to fund her exit plan? Not on my watch. That night, I cooked dinner. Steak, mashed sweet potatoes, roasted carrots, her favorites. I acted normal, asked about her clients, poured her wine, and watched her as she scrolled Instagram, pausing on a photo of us from last fall that Nina had posted with the caption, "Power Couple Vibes." She liked it, smiled, then kissed my cheek and said I was her rock. I wanted to laugh. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, smirked, and flipped it over. I recognized the way she did it. The same muscle memory she had when she used to hide birthday plans or surprise weekend getaways. Except now it was betrayal she was protecting. Around midnight, I slipped into the hallway and checked the footage. Bingo. 10-minute call. Her voice was low, hushed, unmistakably intimate. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," she whispered. "Yes, I miss you too. Just be patient." I watched the entire recording twice. Then I emailed it to myself. Labeled the file, insurance_01. Thursday morning, Nina texted me out of the blue. Said she wanted to meet for coffee. "Need to talk," she wrote. Important. We'd never been close, but she'd always been kind to me. Always the only one at family dinners who asked me real questions or actually listened to the answers. I agreed to meet her Saturday. And while I waited for Saturday to arrive, I built the next phase of my plan. A complete digital folder with labeled files, a secured backup in cloud storage, and a USB key I stashed behind a loose panel in my workshop. Sabrina didn't know what was coming. Logan didn't either. Troy, Charles, Denise. None of them realized the loser contractor they mocked had spent years learning how to plan things that don't fall down. They thought I was slow, too simple to see what they were building. But they were wrong. I arrived early at the coffee shop Nina had suggested, sitting by the window with a black coffee cooling between my hands and a storm chewing away in my gut. I had no idea what she wanted to say or whether I could trust her completely, but if she truly knew what was going on and had something to add, I needed every advantage I could get. Nina showed up 10 minutes late, dressed in jeans and an oversized sweater, the kind of outfit that said she had no interest in impressing anyone from her family anymore. She looked like someone who hadn't slept much either, and her eyes flicked around the cafe like she was scanning for ghosts. She ordered some elaborate coffee concoction that took the barista 5 full minutes to prepare, then sat down across from me, without small talk. For a moment, she just stared at her cup, twisting the cardboard sleeve with her thumb. When she finally looked up at me, I saw something that startled me. Guilt, deep and painful, like she'd been carrying a weight for a long time and just hadn't found the courage to drop it until now. What she said next didn't surprise me. Not exactly. But it confirmed what I'd already suspected and added one more layer to the slow-burning betrayal I'd been cataloging in silence. "I've known about Logan for a while," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They weren't careful during that trip to the lake house last fall. You were working some big project, water damage, I think, and the rest of us went up for the weekend. I caught them." She swore it was just a mistake, something she regretted, promised me she was going to end it, said it was a drunken lapse in judgment. I didn't speak, didn't blink, just listened as she laid it all out. "But then it wasn't a mistake," Nina continued, her face pinched in quiet disgust. "It kept happening. I saw texts, heard phone calls when she thought I was asleep. And then, a couple months ago, she got drunk at dinner. Just me, her, and Troy, and she told me everything. About the plan. About how she was going to stay until she hit partner. Then file, take half your business, and ride off with Logan into some perfect corporate fantasy." I stared at her, trying to read her, wondering why she was telling me all this now. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe she'd finally had enough of her family's toxic lies. Maybe she just saw something in me that reminded her there were still good people left, and she couldn't stomach watching another one get ripped apart. Whatever the reason, I thanked her, asked her not to tell anyone we'd spoken. She agreed, looked relieved, and hugged me before leaving. And that was the first human moment I'd felt in weeks. When I got home, Sabrina was on the phone in the backyard, pacing in slow, controlled circles like a woman pretending her life was still organized into neat little compartments. I watched her from the kitchen window and started to imagine the next move, the next step in a structure I had designed with more precision than any building I'd ever touched. I needed a confrontation, yes, but not an argument. I needed a scene, a performance, a reckoning. And like every good blueprint, it needed careful timing. So I faked a crisis. On Thursday night, I told Sabrina there was a financial emergency at the company. I said one of our biggest clients was threatening to pull out and that I needed advice, specifically her family's advice. It was a masterstroke of manipulation because she couldn't say no without exposing herself, and I knew her ego wouldn't allow her to sit out a discussion that made her feel important. She hesitated at first, claimed she had plans, but when I leaned into the performance, let my voice shake just enough, told her I was scared of losing everything we'd built, she folded. She said she'd call her parents and Troy, said we'd host them again on Friday night, said maybe we should invite Nina, too. Perfect. All Friday morning, I set the stage. I prepped the dining room again, this time not for hospitality but for justice. I laid out folders beside my seat at the head of the table, each one labeled, each one loaded with documents, bank records, company ledgers, text transcripts, audio summaries, financial forensics, and digital timestamps of every betrayal. I double-checked the files on the tablet that would connect to the TV. I practiced the order in which I'd reveal everything, the way a prosecutor might layer arguments in a closing statement. I even wore the outfit she always said made me look the most credible: dark slacks, blue button-down, polished shoes. My last appearance as her perfect husband. The doorbell rang around 6. Her parents were first, Charles offering me his fake handshake and barely disguised disdain. He carried an expensive bottle of Bordeaux, probably hoping to distract from the carnage that was about to befall his little empire. Troy and his wife came next, both as smug as ever. Then Nina arrived, eyes alert, mouth tight, holding a box of pastries she clearly didn't expect anyone to eat. Sabrina floated around the house like a hostess on autopilot, pouring wine, rearranging plates, asking meaningless questions. She kept glancing at her phone and smiling, which told me Logan had no idea what was coming either. We all sat down just after 7. I waited for everyone to settle, to pour their drinks and exchange their fake laughs and pleasantries. Then I stood up, lifted my glass, and said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. To family, I said, to loyalty, and to finally seeing things clearly. They all raised their glasses, some with amusement, some with confusion. Sabrina looked at me with concern that wasn't real, just her instinct reacting to a tone she didn't recognize. I let the silence sit for just a moment too long before continuing. About that business emergency, I said, walking over to the television. It's not really about the company. It's about what's happening right here, at this table. I plugged in the tablet and hit play. The audio began. Sabrina and Troy laughing outside during the previous family dinner. His voice mocking, hers cold. Then her words, already working on it. My lawyer says we can take half his business too. The room went still. Charles's jaw locked. Denise covered her mouth. Troy turned pale. Sabrina didn't move, just stared ahead, frozen in place like she'd been caught in a flashbang. I clicked to the next file. Screenshots, emails, financial transfers, the gradual draining of our joint account. Her attempts to secure a home equity line without my knowledge. Her messages with Logan, dozens of them, filtered and printed, color-coded for emphasis. He doesn't suspect a thing. Soon I'll be out, and we'll be free. I'll have half the company and the house. Charles tried to interrupt, but I raised my voice just enough to cut him off. I brought up the spreadsheet where I had listed every dollar I spent on Sabrina's education. Tuition, books, rent, groceries, late-night rides from campus, bar prep courses, even the suit she wore to her first big interview. Over $41,000. I pointed to the camera footage, time-stamped and date-verified, where she told Logan she was stringing me along. I ended with the bank application, her forged attempt to leverage the house we both lived in, but which I had bought and rebuilt. Finally, I delivered the last nail. Oh, and did Sabrina mention Logan is married? I said casually, watching everyone's eyes widen. Yeah, I had coffee with his wife yesterday. Her name is Melanie. Lovely woman. Very interested in hearing how long this has been going on. The room erupted. Charles stood and shouted. Denise tried to pull him back. Troy fumbled with his phone, probably trying to delete messages I'd already backed up 3 times. Sabrina grabbed my arm and pleaded, saying I'd misunderstood everything, that she'd just been scared, that she didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at her like she was a stranger and leaned in close enough that only she could hear what I said next. You were building an escape plan. I was building a trap. Then I walked to the center of the room and flipped the dining table, my handmade, sanded, stained oak table, sending wine, glass, and dessert crashing into a chaotic heap on the floor. Nina jumped to her feet. Sabrina screamed. Charles lunged toward me, but was blocked by Troy. Through all of it, I just stood there, silent, watching 7 years of deception collapse around the people who thought they were in control. And the best part? This wasn't even the final act. The sound of my table slamming into the floor still echoed in my skull as I stood amid the wreckage, unmoving, while the family that had once sat smug and superior at my dinner table now shouted over each other in a pile of broken plates and scrambled justifications. Sabrina didn't speak at first. Her eyes darted between her parents and Troy, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to find the right lie to fit the moment. Only now there were no safe words left to choose from. Charles was the first to regain his voice, but the tone had shifted. Gone was the self-assured corporate strategist, and in his place stood a man whose plans had just exploded in front of him. "You think this little stunt scares us?" he snapped, pacing behind his wife who looked like she might faint. "You think you can humiliate our family like this and get away with it? You're playing with fire, Jack. We have resources. You're a contractor, not a king. Don't mistake this spectacle for power." I almost laughed, almost. But I didn't. I looked him in the eyes, calm and unblinking, and asked a single question that shut him up faster than any shout could have. "You mean the resources she tried to access through the home equity line of credit she forged with my name?" He flinched. "Or the 20 grand she already moved out of our joint account, right under your nose?" Before he could answer, Sabrina started crying. Not the quiet, remorseful kind of cry that comes from shame, but the ugly, desperate kind that people use when they realize their performance has finally failed. She clutched my arm like she was still entitled to comfort, like maybe I'd fold under the familiar sound of her voice breaking. "Please, Jack, this wasn't supposed to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you like this." I pulled away from her hand slowly, not in anger, but in the same way you'd remove your fingers from a dying fire. Deliberate, final, clean. What way was it supposed to happen? I asked her, my voice low and flat. "Were you going to wait until my birthday? Until I landed that next big contract? Until you had your name on every part of what I bled for?" She said nothing. Her silence was louder than any answer would have been. Troy, the coward, tried to act innocent. He shook his head, palms raised like he'd just walked in late to the scene of someone else's crime. "I didn't know she was serious," he muttered, trying to sound apologetic. "It was just talk, man. We were joking. She wasn't actually going to go through with it." I looked at him like the pile of trash he was and said, "Then why were you helping her file reports to my accountant under false pretenses? You think Russell doesn't back up his records?" He blinked, stammered something about being misled. His wife, who had been dead silent through the entire night, finally turned toward him and said in a voice cold enough to cut stone, "Is that why you were gone for those business lunches? Helping your sister gut someone else's marriage?" That shut him down for good. Sabrina's mother, Denise, tried to bring the room back under control, but every word out of her mouth sounded hollow. "This isn't the place, Jack. If you and Sabrina are having issues, you should work them out in private. You're both adults." I gave her the kind of look you give a realtor who tries to sell you a house with termite damage and says it's charming. "No," I replied. "We're not working anything out. And the only thing private about this was how many months she thought she could live in my house, spend my money, and build a future with someone else while pretending to be my wife." Then, while Sabrina's mascara streaked down her cheeks and she whispered apologies I didn't believe for a second, I delivered the final blow. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, picking up my phone from the counter. "Dominic, Logan, whatever name she used with you, he's not available anymore. I had coffee with his wife yesterday. Melanie, lovely woman, doesn't deserve any of this either." Sabrina's entire body tensed like I'd slapped her. "You what?" she choked out. "You told her?" I nodded. "She deserves the truth. You two weren't just sneaking around. You were plotting the exact same kind of betrayal, just on different foundations. So I figured it was only fair." That was the moment the last thread of Sabrina's illusion snapped. She screamed, something incoherent, then turned and hurled her wine glass at the wall, where it shattered next to the fireplace. Denise jumped. Charles shouted. Troy slunk toward the hallway. Only Nina moved, crossed the room, calmly picked up a handful of napkins, and began wiping the edge of the table like none of the drama belonged to her. Sabrina's voice followed me as I walked toward the door. "You think you've won, Jack?" she shrieked. "You'll regret this. You can't just destroy me and walk away like it was nothing." I turned, met her eyes, and let the words fall like a slow, deliberate wrecking ball. "You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights. Then I left. The hotel I'd booked was cheap but clean, and I slept that night better than I had in months. The dog curled up on the edge of the bed like nothing had changed, because for him, nothing really had. I was still me, still the guy who walked him, fed him, never lied to him. The next morning, while Sabrina was undoubtedly combing through broken glass and broken delusions, I returned to the house. I waited until I was sure she was gone, then entered with the spare key I hadn't returned yet. Packed my essentials, my tools, a few clothes, personal photos, the dog's things. I left the key on the counter with a note that simply read, "All future contact goes through Miles." Then I drove to the small apartment I'd signed the lease for 3 days earlier. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No shared bank accounts, no surveillance, no lying voices pretending to love me while texting someone else under the sheets. It was quiet, clean, and empty in a way that felt safe. For 2 days, I ignored everything. Didn't check social media. Didn't answer unknown numbers. Just unpacked, cleaned, and walked the dog. I ate like a man recovering from surgery. Small bites, slow sips of coffee, trying to remember what it felt like to exist without suspicion gnawing at my brain. Then, on the third morning, I turned on my phone. 47 messages from Sabrina. The first 2 were all caps. "You ruined everything. And how dare you embarrass me?" Then came the pleas. "Please, Jack. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll cut off my family. Just talk to me." Then came the bargaining. "I'll sign anything. You want the house? Fine. The money? Fine. Just tell me what you want." But that's what she never understood. It was never about the house, or the money, or even the business. It was about trust. Years of it, layered in sacrifices, late nights, broken promises that I had swallowed because I believed love meant waiting things out. And she turned all of that into leverage, into strategy, into a tactical exit plan that treated me like a disposable asset. The last message came in at 3:14 a.m. I told Logan everything. About the divorce, the money, the plan. He dumped me. Said he wants to fix his marriage. Now I have no one. And I felt nothing. No triumph. No joy. Just the kind of exhausted emptiness you get after gutting an old house and standing in the dust, knowing that no one will ever see how hard it was to tear it all down. I typed only one response and sent it without hesitation. "The papers are at your office. Please direct all communication through Miles." Then I blocked her number. There are some structures so damaged you don't bother trying to patch the walls. You just clear the wreckage and start fresh. And for the first time in almost a decade, I finally had the room to rebuild. It was strange waking up in a place that didn't carry the ghosts of 7 wasted years, the mattress on the floor and the bare walls around me somehow feeling more like home than that perfectly decorated house ever had in the end. I spent the first morning after blocking Sabrina doing nothing grand or dramatic, just sipping bad motel coffee and throwing a ball across the empty living room for the dog to chase. A silent reminder that life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. There were no texts now, no missed calls lighting up my screen, only the slow realization that my entire future had been wiped clean in the space of one violent, necessary decision. Later that afternoon, Miles called to update me on the paperwork. His tone was professional, clipped, but I could hear the faintest hint of satisfaction in his voice as he told me Sabrina's lawyer had already started sending feelers about amicable settlement options. I told him I didn't care about the house, didn't want the car, didn't need a dime from her ruined dreams. All I wanted was for it to end as fast as legally possible. "She's scared now," Miles said after a pause, like he wasn't sure if he should even say it aloud. "She's realizing the only leverage she had was smoke, and you already burned it down." It should have felt like a victory, but honestly, it just felt like someone handing me a broom and pointing at a battlefield. There's no celebration in survival, only the quiet relief of still breathing when the smoke clears. A few days later, while I was sorting through a half-unpacked box of old work gloves and tools, my phone buzzed again. Not Sabrina this time, not anyone from her side. It was Nina. Her message was short, almost hesitant. "Heard you moved. Hope you're okay. Also, thank you." I stared at the screen for a long time before answering, feeling something thaw in my chest that I hadn't realized had frozen over completely. We exchanged a few simple texts, nothing heavy, no mention of the past week's chaos, just small, Steady bridges being built where an entire family had chosen to burn theirs down to the dirt. That same evening, as if fate had a sense of humor darker than mine, I got another unexpected call. Rachel, Logan's wife, the woman I had met for coffee after revealing the full scope of her husband's treachery. We talked for over an hour, not about revenge or lawsuits or the people who had wronged us, but about rebuilding. About how damn strange it felt to be back at the starting line of your own life after running in circles for so long you forgot what direction you were even facing. She wasn't looking for pity or drama, just someone who understood that sometimes survival looks like failure to the outside world. Rachel told me she had found a support group for people blindsided by financial infidelity, and that if I ever wanted to join, even just to sit silently and listen, there would be a seat open. I didn't commit, didn't promise anything, but after we hung up, I bookmarked the link she sent, just in case. The divorce moved quickly after that, much faster than anyone had predicted. Without the assets she had hoped to seize, without the home equity loan or the business valuation skewed in her favor, Sabrina's bargaining power collapsed like a rotten beam under too much weight. She signed everything through gritted teeth, and the settlement reflected the reality she had tried so hard to manipulate. A clean split of what little was left to split, no future claims, no shared debts, no further contact required. Miles congratulated me over the phone, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like someone finally closing the door on a house fire, knowing the smoke would still cling to his clothes long after he walked away. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into my work, into projects that required more focus than memory, more sweat than thought. I worked until my hands ached, until my back screamed, until exhaustion was the only thing strong enough to drown out the noise still echoing in the empty spaces of my mind. The dog adjusted faster than I did, claiming the corner of the couch in my new apartment like he had always known it was his. It was about a month later when I finally let myself breathe enough to visit some old friends again. Guys who had been too polite to ask questions during the storm, but whose steady presence reminded me that some foundations don't crumble when tested. Over beers and bad takeout, they made jokes about my new bachelor lifestyle, offered crude advice about dating apps, and talked about work like nothing monumental had just shattered my world. It was exactly what I needed: normalcy without pity, camaraderie without commentary. Sabrina never tried to contact me again after the divorce was finalized. I heard through a few mutual acquaintances that she tried to spin the story her way for a while, painting herself as the victim of my coldness, my ambition, my supposed emotional distance. But the facts had a way of surfacing despite her efforts, and soon enough, most of those mutuals stopped mentioning her name at all. The last I heard, she had left Asheville entirely, moving to a new city where nobody knew the details of her downfall. Charles and Denise apparently told anyone who would listen that they were focusing on their investments, now, whatever that meant. Troy got divorced not long after everything blew up, though I didn't waste any time digging for the details. Karma moves at its own pace, but it never loses its way. One crisp evening, about 2 months after the dust had settled, I stood out on the small balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights, a cheap beer sweating in my hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit: hope. Real, aching, terrifying hope. Not because I had a clear plan, not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time in what felt like forever, the future was mine again. Unwritten, unburdened. Nina texted again that night, telling me she had finally switched her major, abandoning the law track her parents had forced on her in favor of art history, something she had loved since she was a kid but never dared to pursue. Your bravery was contagious, she wrote. Thank you. I smiled at the message, not because I thought I was brave, but because maybe, just maybe, tearing everything down hadn't just saved me. The next morning, I woke early, laced up my boots, and drove to the nearest trailhead with the dog riding shotgun, tail thumping against the seat like a metronome. We hiked for hours without talking, without thinking, just breathing in the cold mountain air and letting the world remind us that there's beauty in the rebuild, even when the wreckage still smolders behind you. Starting over at 37 wasn't part of the plan. Living alone in a one-bedroom apartment with mismatched furniture and a mattress on the floor wasn't exactly what dreams are made of. But every plank I lay down now, every wall I raise, every decision I make, those are mine. Built with my own hands, with no one standing behind me waiting to tear it down for profit or convenience. The foundation is the hardest part of any project. But if you get it right, everything else stands tall. And this time, I'm building it stronger than ever.